Good evening, everyone. It is Tuesday, January 26th, 2021. This is the first meeting of this year for the Michigan City Plan Commission. And Skylar, if you could take the roll.
Mr. Dabney's not here. Miss Esbar?
Here.
Mr. Gallus?
Here.
Mr. Granquist?
Here.
Mr. Gresham?
Here.
Mr. Klinder?
Here.
Mr. Sperling?
Here.
Mr. Wright?
Present.
Mr. Zimmer?
Here.
Attorney Hill?
Here.
Okay, we're ready to go. We have a form. Good.
Great. We'll waive reading the policy of conduct and procedures, but have them inserted into the minutes, please. And then the next item of business is election of officers, because this is the first meeting of the new year. So I'll turn it over to Skylar to do that.
Okay, so I'll step in and act as the secretary right now. I will open up the floor for election of the president, nomination and election of president.
Hey, Skylar, could I ask who the officers were last year?
Absolutely. The officers last year were Larry as president. Oh, who's our vice president? I forgot.
I was.
Yeah,
That's
Dan
the one I didn't
Granquist.
know.
Granquist was vice president, and then Christina was our secretary.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm sorry, Dan. I forgot.
It's a very important role here.
It's been a rough year. It was a rough year. So,
Yeah, that's an understatement.
Yeah.
I'll open the floor back up for nominations for president. Or I'll accept nominations for president.
I nominate Mr. Zimmer as president again for 2021.
Mr. Zimmer?
Yes, I accept.
Mr. Zimmer, would you serve again? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other nominations?
If the
Do I hear a
former
second?
slate is interested in serving again, I would be willing to nominate the former slate.
Do the former slate want to serve again?
Yep.
Dan?
I would accept.
Do
I
I
would-
hear a second?
I will second that.
Is that okay, Steve, to take a vote?
Well, I think you should just ask the question if there are any other nominations for either
Are there any-
president or the vice president.
Any other nominations for president and vice president? Okay, I'll call the roll. Let me make a note real quick before I do that. Okay, you ready? Ms. Esbar?
We voting?
I. Oh,
I'm so sorry.
Are we voting on the slate then? Is that the nomination? Okay.
Same slate. That would be Larry as president, Mr. Granquist as vice president, and then Christina, you're appointed. So we'll have to, we'll open that up in a minute. Mr. Gallus,
Yes.
Mr. Granquist,
Yes.
Mr. Gresham,
Yes.
Mr. Klinder,
Yes.
Mr. Sperling,
Yes.
Mr. Wright,
Yes.
and Mr. Zimmer.
Yes.
Motion approved. I will hand it off to Larry, and then the next order of business is appointing of a secretary.
So I would ask for nominations for the position of secretary.
Actually, perhaps just a motion,
Okay.
a motion to appoint someone. It's an appointment. It's not an elected office.
I see, okay. So are there nominees for the appointment of secretary?
I would nominate Miss Esbar if she is willing to serve again.
I would be willing to serve again.
Is there a motion to approve?
I would second that motion for appointment.
I'll call the roll. Ms. Esbar,
Aye.
Mr. Gallus,
Yes.
Mr. Granquist,
Yes.
Mr. Gresham,
Yes.
Mr. Klinder,
Oh, okay.
okay, Mr. Sperling,
Yes.
Mr. Wright,
Yes.
and Mr. Zimmer.
Yes.
Motion approved.
The next item of business tonight is approval of minutes from our last month's regular meeting of December 22nd. I assume everybody had a chance to look those over. And if Attorney Hale does not have any comments or changes, then we'd be looking for a motion to approve.
I do not.
If there are no corrections, I would move to accept the minutes as submitted.
I would second.
I'll call the roll. Ms. Esbar,
Aye.
Mr. Gallus,
Yes.
Mr. Gresham.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Granquist.
Yes.
Got you. I got you, Michael, already. Sorry, I skipped Mr. Granquist.
Okay.
Mr. Klinder,
Yes.
Mr. Sperling,
Yes.
Mr. Wright,
Yes.
and Mr. Zimmer.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Call to action to take that position, and now this position is open, and I go where I need. So if this board, it's a Fort County, votes for me to serve in the capacity of building commissioner, I would certainly do so to the best of my ability.
Is there any way we can mute, if you're not talking, just mute yourself so we don't have the sound coming through? Sorry. Larry?
Okay, yeah. So the first item of business this evening, or the next item of business, is petition P-102-20. Skylar, are you going to introduce this?
Yeah, I can introduce it. This is a petition. This is P-102-20. Let me admit this person real quick. P-102-20, Lake and Blaine LLC. They're requesting a rezoning from M2 to R1E, and they're located on approximate 2.25 acre parcel situated between Blaine Street, Mulligan Street, Center Street, and Lake Ave for potential residential development. They'll be represented tonight by Attorney Barry McDonald, and this is continued from 12/22/20. You might recall that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll hand it over to Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. President. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Members of the commission, my name is Barry McDonald. I'm an attorney here in Michigan City with offices at 601 Franklin Street. I am representing this evening the petitioner, Lake and Blaine LLC, with regard to their petition to rezone an approximate 2.25 acre parcel, as Skylar indicated, on the north end of Michigan City, kind of sandwiched between Blaine, Mulligan, and Center Streets on Lake Avenue. We are asking that the current zoning of M2 manufacturing be changed to R1E single-family residential. I see with me tonight is the principal of Lake and Blaine LLC, Mr. Jack Capeless. He's appearing via Zoom like the rest of us. Jack is the principal of Lake and Blaine LLC. He's a longtime Michigan City resident, and Lake and Blaine has owned this parcel for now over 15 years. I will try and be as brief as possible. Just want to point out a few things as we move forward. Along with the petition that we submitted back in 2020, we also submitted a schematic, a site plan, if you will, indicating not only the area of the property in question, but also a concept plan for the subdivision. I do want to point out that this is far from final. This is just for illustrative purposes. We obviously will have to, if we're successful here and successful at the council, we will then in earnest turn to the subdivision process where we will have a more thought out and vetted subdivision plan. But as we sit here now, this is a good representation of the plan that my client is envisioning for the site. Secondly, last week we submitted a couple additional documents to the plan department. One was a topographical sketch of the property prepared by Global Engineering, and I submitted that because I've learned from prior times before this commission that as part of the decision criteria laid out in the state statute, the environmental conditions, including topographical conditions, are something to be considered. So I wanted to show what the topographical conditions were. Obviously, it's a bit of a rolling site, but certainly not prohibitive for residential development. The second thing I submitted was a beacon printout, the LaPorte County Beacon Site aerial, and I clicked on the criteria of both floodplain and wetlands. Obviously, neither of the big blue and green blobs that show up when you click on those showed up. Again, to further indicate that wetlands and floodplains are not affecting this property for future residential development. Two additional points for consideration. Number one, we are well aware of the department reports that the Plan Commission received and the department received from both the water department with regard to a sewer main, a private sewer main on the property. My client was aware of that. That is subject to a recorded easement. So that's been there from the time he purchased the property back in 2005. Secondly, there was a department report from the sanitary district indicating the presence of a large sewer line. That we were not aware of because there is no recorded easement for that sewer line. So though perhaps premature at this stage of the game, I just wanted to let the commission know we were aware of them. Obviously, we're not going to disturb them, and or in the case of the sewer line, we will have to negotiate with the sanitary district about developing an easement or potentially negotiating the move of that line out of the center of the site, or perhaps the purchase of a portion of the site by the sanitary district. So again, that's going to be more relevant as we move further into the subdivision process, but I just wanted to let the commission know that we know about it and we will be factoring it in as we develop the site. Second specific issue I wanted to note and bring up for the commission was that when my client purchased this property in 2005, he purchased it from Weil McLean. Even though Weil McLean owned this property, as best we can tell historically, it was not used for any industrial use, perhaps never used for anything, but just a vacant site, maybe bought as a buffer, maybe bought for the future. But in 2005, the deed did contain, as do all deeds if you've ever seen a Weil McLean deed when they've sold some of the property surrounding their facility, it contained an environmental restrictive covenant. And that environmental restrictive covenant would have precluded residential development on the site. However, because again, there really were no environmental issues on the site, my client in 2009 obtained a recorded release of the environmental restrictive covenant. So there is no covenant that would prohibit further residential development on the site. Just again, wanted the commission to be aware of that. I certainly do not want to bore the commission to tears going over all the gory details of the decision criteria found in Indiana Code 36.7-4-603. I would just argue that this particular petition, I think, does a marvelous job of clicking all the boxes on those 8 different criteria. Just to hit a couple of the highlights, that criteria speaks about the property being consistent with the county land development plan, and certainly those familiar with all of the different plans that particularly the city of Michigan City has done regarding the north end, the lack of inventory for additional north end and Sheridan Beach property is a problem. And so developing this site to allow for single family conforming residential use is certainly in keeping with the development plan of the county and the city of Michigan City. And secondly, a lot of those criteria, those 8 criteria, speak generally the same song. They talk about compatibility with current conditions, no adverse effects on value and use of the surrounding property. Certainly the current conditions and the criteria speak about a change in either technological advances or developmental changes making the current zoning inappropriate. And here, certainly many, many, many decades ago, when this was envisioned to be perhaps an extension of Weil McLean, the zoning made sense. Certainly now, in light of the fact that nearly every property surrounding this, but for the neighboring warehouse, which I believe is owned by B&E Marine and probably used for boat storage and other storage, all the other property along Mulligan, Blaine, Center, Arndt, everything in the neighborhood is zoned R1E. So this change really keeps this property in keeping with what already exists. So just kind of in summary, a lot of times I think, as I've been before this commission over the years seeking a zoning change, doing nothing is a viable option. In other words, I think the commission has every right in a lot of instances to do nothing. But here I would argue doing nothing creates one of 2 less than desirable outcomes. In other words, keeping it manufacturing allows for A, which is probably the better of the 2, which is nothing happens. The property just sits and does nothing forever. That's one option. That's not great planning from a city standpoint, not making property productive. The second and perhaps less enviable result of doing nothing would be that there actually is manufacturing and industrial development on the site, which is perfectly allowed right now, meaning that all of the surrounding neighbors would be subject to noise, pollution, lighting, truck traffic. It's amazing that, honestly, that Weil McLean's trucks manage to get back through that neighborhood, but somehow they do. But the presence of another significant industrial development in that neighborhood, I think, would be a disaster for those who have invested a significant amount of money in their homes in the neighborhood. So that's my kind of summary of the petition. I thank you. I thank you on behalf of Jack, Mr. Capeless, for your time. Ask again for your favorable recommendation to move ahead to the city council for the zoning change. And certainly we'll try and answer any questions, as will Mr. Capeless if the commission has any. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Barry. So I think before we take questions, let's hear all the reports. So if Skylar wants to give his report, and then Mr. Hale, and then everybody can ask their questions and make their comments.
Yeah. So I'll give my report, and then I'll speak a little bit afterwards. So just bear with me for a minute. This is a report for P102-20, a rezoning of Blake and Blaine and Lake LLC. The request is to rezone a rezoning of property from present into heavy industrial to R1E waterfront single family residential. Staff analysis. The property in question is approximately 2.25 acres of vacant land that is currently zoned for M2 heavy industrial. According to Indiana Code 36-7-4-603, in considering a request for rezoning, the Planning Commission shall pay reasonable regard to 1, the comprehensive plan, which you may recall we have a comprehensive plan, MC 2040 comprehensive plan, momentum. 2, current conditions and character of current structures and uses in each district. 3, the most desirable use for which the land in each district is adapted. 4, the conservation of property values throughout the jurisdiction. And 5, reasonable development and growth. Staff makes the following findings. 1, that the petition concerns a request for rezone of approximately 2.25 acres located generally between Blaine Street, Mulligan Street, and the Amtrak Railroad bisecting Center Street. And 2, that the real estate consists of approximately 2.25 acres and that the real estate is currently zoned as M2 heavy industrial district. And 4, that the petitioner requests that the real estate be rezoned to R1E waterfront single-family residential district. And 5, that the requested change in zoning will be consistent with the Michigan City Comprehensive Plan, which labels this property as residential in use. And 6, that the requested change in zoning will be compatible with the conditions and character of current structures and uses in the immediate neighborhood. And 7, that the requested change in zoning will provide the most reasonable uses for the real estate for which that the requested change in zoning will provide the most reasonable uses for which the real estate is adapted, and the proposed land use will not have an adverse effect on the surrounding property. And 8, that the requested change in zoning will not be injurious or detrimental to the surrounding property values and will further conservation of property values throughout the neighborhood, and that the requested change in zoning will promote orderly and responsible community growth and development and will not adversely affect the community. And 10, that the topography, soil condition, and other physical features of the real estate, as well as its location in the area of predominantly residential uses and zoning, are suitable for the proposed use and zoning change, and that there are no covenants or restrictions running with the real estate which may be affected in a manner by the proposed rezoning. And 11, that the requested change in zoning is not spot zoning, which confers a special benefit on a relatively small tract without commensurate benefit to the community. And 12, that the requested change in zoning will not disrupt or destroy any neighborhood plan. And that 13, that the requested change in zoning will better promote and facilitate the development of real estate than the current zoning, which allows uses that could be detrimental to the preservation of the property values, environment, and uses in the surrounding neighborhood. And with that, I'll say that when we wrote our comprehensive plan, this particular parcel was of interest to, I remember this was of interest when we wrote the comprehensive plan. We couldn't imagine it maintaining its M2 zoning in the future. And it's actually, we saw it as a detriment to the neighborhood that we were seeing investment into. I would hate to see a parking lot or a storage area for Wall McLean or some other industrial storage there that could really be of significant impact to that area and that neighborhood and possibly prevent further investment. So I just wanted to preface kind of my recommendation with that. Staff recommendation. The planning staff has reviewed the proposed request for the rezoning and recommends approval of the petition based on the findings above. With that, I'll open it up for questions for me, or if you want to hear Steve's report first.
Yeah, Mr. Hale, why don't you give us your report, please?
My attorney report is for petition number P-102-20. The petitioner and owner is Lake and Blaine LLC. The request, as you know, is to rezone this property from M2 Heavy Industrial to R1E Waterfront Residential District. I know, first of all, I always like to note for the record that I've had an opportunity to review all the application documentation which was supplied by the petitioner. I find that it meets all of our requirements and is in order, and you're free to consider this matter. Next, at the risk of boring you with repeating some of my reports in the past, I would just briefly remind you that our zoning ordinance allows property owners, as well as the Common Council or the Plan Commission itself, to seek changes in our zoning map. And that is what is happening here. And the procedure is that the Plan Commission considers the matter initially, holds a public hearing, which is what we're doing tonight, and then certifies the proposal to the Common Council, which is charged with approval or disapproval of the zoning request. The Plan Commission then is not approving this. It is to send it on under the zoning ordinance and state law to the City Council with either a favorable recommendation or an unfavorable recommendation, or with no recommendation. Both Mr. McDonald and Mr. York have told you about some of the things that our statute and our zoning ordinance require you to pay reasonable regard to. They are repeated in both the findings that you'll find in my report that I've submitted to you in writing, and in Mr. Schuyler York's report that he just read to you, and that is also in writing. Those findings should be adopted if you're going to make an approval, and should be discounted if you're not. And so with that, I would just state finally that an appropriate motion here would be to approve or disapprove this request for rezoning of this property under petition P-102-20, and that the Plan Commission send it on to the Michigan City Common Council with a favorable or an unfavorable or no recommendation.
Great, thanks, Mr. Hale. Any questions or comments now from commission members?
I just wanted to offer, if I could.
Yes, please.
It's very exciting. In my personal opinion, having done this for about a decade now, this little Canada/Hungry Hollow kind of neighborhood is one of the more underutilized, more underappreciated parts of town. If you look at similar communities in kind of our peer lakefront group, you don't find very many open sections of land this close to a beach or lakefront. And it's very exciting to see some plans coming together for this piece, and I'm very excited about it.
Thanks, Mike. I agree with that totally. I did have a question though for either Barry or Jack. What are the plans for Lot 7?
Well, I guess I could answer it two ways, and certainly Jack can chime in because he kind of was involved in the layout of it. But I think it was to show kind of a minimally invasive plan. In other words, a plan where you weren't carving out, and I'm looking at it, Mr. Zimmer, where you're not carving out a new road or cul-de-sac. Certainly, as we move forward, that could be a possibility. There could, in other words, be instead of 7 lots, perhaps 10 lots. Although the second part of my answer is when we laid that out, or when Jack laid that out, or Tim Haas laid it out more specifically, we were not aware of the sanitary district sewer line there. So that's going to have to...
Is that the dashed line that's running diagonally through the...
Actually, that is pretty close to where it is, yes. And then the other dashed line to the, I guess it would be to the south, getting closer to the railroad tracks, would be the private water line easement as well. So I guess I would answer, Larry, that there's a lot of things that could happen with Lot 7. It could be reconfigured such that the sewer line is moved closer to the water easement, thus freeing up some space to put in, instead of one big 1 acre lot, maybe 3 or 4 lots. It could be that as we discuss things further with the sanitary district, they decide, you know what, we like the sewer line there, and that sewer line, which I understand is very old and very deep, that they may want to buy the area that we have marked as Lot 7 just for future. I mean, I've done work for the water department over the years, and we buy property on occasion just because we know in the future we may need to put a lift station or a pump house or move a water main. So it could be that they're the buyer of Lot 7. So as to any other insight as to why it was laid out that kind of preliminarily, Mr. Zimmer, I would maybe, if Jack has anything to add in terms of color, but that's my answer.
Okay, thanks.
Jack, I think you have to unmute.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Barry hit on it pretty well. You know, the idea was to do it with conforming lots and try not to put in streets and cul-de-sacs and too much. So there is some uncertainty about what you're calling Lot 7. You know, the thought is maybe it could be a couple of lots that enter in off Mulligan Street. But it does so happen that there's, you know, the issue with the sewer line without an easement that's part of that area too. So in some ways, what I picture is the lots along Blaine Street, you know, something will happen with those quicker.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions, comments?
I have a question, if I might, Mr. Zimmer.
Yes, Mr. Hale.
Just for a matter of record, Mr. Cablis or Mr. McDonald, although we're talking about those lots, it's not been subdivided. So it remains just one large, let's call it meets and bounds piece of property. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct,
That's
Mr.
all.
Hale. It's just, this again was just a representation of what could be developed so that both the public and the commission would have an idea of maybe what my client was thinking about.
Very good.
Skylar, this is Fred Klinder. I tried to get hold of the forester and talk to Jessica concerning all the trees that are on there and the deforestation of that. And I was wondering if we had any feel for what the city's feelings is or rules or regulations concerning tree removal and replacement, et cetera.
So at time of subdivision, they'll have to do tree surveying and things of that nature. But really, Fred, it's going to preserve some of the trees, but it's going to also remove the ones where the house is going to sit, things of that nature. I mean, there is some limitations to that, but I'm sure that you will still find some trees probably in the rear. It's really up to the ones that he identifies. We haven't gotten that far yet. But it's going to be, you know, native trees, ones above, larger than an 8-inch at breast height, things of that nature. We did something similar to the corner at Lake and Fogarty, if I'm not mistaken. Unfortunately, there was some dead trees, and then there was some, just to give you an example, there were some invasives there, so there really wasn't a lot of saved. Invasives don't count. But yeah, at time of subdivision is when we require a tree survey. We'll request those things. Typically, that's when they're submitted to us. There's still a little bit of time. Now, he is allowed to go in there and clear out brush for surveying purposes, so to lay out his lots, survey underneath. But that's just simply, brush, anything that's preventing, surveying equipment getting in there and things of that nature. But yeah, that will kick in here when we go to survey.
Okay.
Or when we go to subdivision. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Skylar. I'd like to move this along a little bit because, maybe he's already left. Mr. Sperling needed to leave for another meeting and wanted to vote on this petition. So
looks like he already left. We have Bryant joining us too. May I add one more thing while we're on the subject? Mr. Kaplis came to me, probably at the beginning of last year, and we've been working on this project, taking it through. He kind of offered up some scenarios, and I'm glad that he wanted to do this. This is really what he wanted to do, and I was very happy that this came through, just to add some more support from the planning department to get this from M2 to a residential use where it just makes sense for this neighborhood. So.
Okay. Any other questions from commission members? At this point, Mr. Hale, would we open it for public comment?
Yes, it should be open for the public and any remonstrances.
Okay.
I'm not sure if Mr. York has any remonstrances.
I don't, but I see Miss Eleanor is here, and I know that she represents the neighborhood there. I don't know if I'll open it up if she'd like to make any statements, because I know she's come to a lot of meetings when we kept moving it forward.
Very good.
Skylar, for inviting me. Everything sounds great.
Ms.
Everyone in the.
Could you give us your name and address, please?
Of course. Eleanor Hartman, 230 Fogarty Street, Michigan City, Indiana.
Thank you.
I just want to express that everyone in the neighborhood is delighted at the aspect of having single-family homes developed there. We're really excited about it. I think it'd be a wonderful, wonderful addition to the neighborhood.
Great, thank you. Any other public comment?
Bryant Dabney's joined us, Larry. He's got his hand up. I know it's not public, but if you want to recognize him, I'm not.
Just recognize that he's joined the meeting?
I think he wants to say something.
Oh, all right, sure.
Yeah, I don't know who was responsible. Somebody just let me in the meeting, so I came on just a couple minutes late. But I didn't get a chance to make a comment on this, and I'm happy to see actually that this is going from heavy industrial to residential one, so single family homes. This has been a discussion that's been going on with Ellie and others in the group over there, with the big concerns with Wild McLean being around there, because if they were to buy this property, I mean they could turn into a parking lot or do whatever with heavy industrial, something like that. So I'm really happy that it's being rezoned as residential, so we can keep that feel in the neighborhood, single family homes. So I just wanted to make that comment. And Ellie, I'm waving at her right there. I don't know if she sees me, but she's one of my favorite people over there. So I love dealing with her. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. So I guess if there's no other public comment, then I guess we would move into a motion.
I would make a motion that we accept the findings of fact, the staff report, and make a recommendation to the city council that we approve this petition.
I would second that motion.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second, Skylar.
I'll call the roll. Mr. Dabney,
Aye.
Mrs. Espar,
Aye.
Mr. Gallus.
I have to abstain.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Mr. Granquist,
Yes.
Mr. Gresham,
Yes.
Mr. Klinder,
Yes.
Mr. Sperling. Oh, Andy left us. I'm sorry. He didn't get to vote on. Mr. Wright,
Yes.
Mr. Zimmer.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Very good. Congratulations, Barry and Jack, and good luck on your project. We look forward to seeing it develop.
Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yes,
for
sir.
serving our community.
Thank you very much.
As you will remember, we need to certify this to the Common Council, and I've submitted to you all a written certification of the Plan Commission of the City of Michigan City, Indiana. And that certification basically sets out what we've done tonight. It adopts the findings that we've talked about. And you need to approve that certification. So an appropriate motion would be to approve the certification regarding this petition P-102-20, forwarding this to the Michigan City Common Council with a favorable recommendation. So a motion to adopt that certification, and then we will send that to the City Council.
I would move for the adoption of that, along with a favorable recommendation from the Plan Commission.
I would second.
Thank you. We
I'll
have
call the roll.
a motion and a second, Skylar.
Mr. Dabney,
Aye.
Ms. Espar,
Aye.
Mr. Gallus.
Do I have to abstain on this too?
Okay. Mr. Granquist,
Yes.
Mr. Gresham,
Yes.
Mr. Klinder,
Yes.
Mr. Sperling had to leave us. Mr. Wright,
Yes.
Mr. Zimmer.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all very much again.
Thank you.
So the next item of business is our second petition, B-100-20. Skylar, are you going to introduce this?
Yeah, so I'll introduce this. This is an amended petition for P-100-20. This is a petition for Stephen Lyle Smith is requesting a rezoning from B2 and R1D to all B2 at 4507 East Highway 12 to allow for construction of a self-storage facility. They'll be represented by attorney Bradley Adamski, and I'll hand it over to Brad, and I'll hand it over to Brad, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Skylar. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Is my microphone working okay first? Great. Zoom adjustment, we're all doing it, but that's the world we live in right now. My name is Brad Adamski. I'm an attorney at Drayton Beachy, Srugo and Elliott, operating out of 820 Jefferson and LaPorte, representing my client, Stephen Lyle Smith, who is the principal owner and also the president of General Development Corporation of Kankakee. This is a petition for rezone, similar to the petition you just heard. So the great thing about following a competent, capable attorney like Barry is all the details have been laid out for you, all the difficult part of the law and everything as far as what we're asking for tonight. The difficult thing about following somebody like Barry is you're following somebody like Barry. My client actually filed this petition. We filed it originally last June or July. And the idea back then was we've got this weird L-shaped parcel at 4507 Highway 12. He was looking to put storage units on that property. The way it's currently zoned, the front 400 feet or so that are on Highway 12 are zoned B2, and the rear of the property is zoned R1D. It's a consequence of the rezoning or the changing of the zoning maps a number of years back, and you've actually now got one parcel that's got two zoning classifications. When we originally filed the petition, we were asking for a change to M1. Then after consultation with the city and discussions with them, realized B2 was the way to go, which would still allow for the storage units, but just as a special exception, as opposed to just an approved use. After that time, my client actually then bought the property immediately adjacent to the east, where an existing storage facility was already in place. And then last fall or last winter, just towards the end of the year, went before the Board of Zoning Appeals to expand that already existing special exception there to add a couple of storage units. So in the meantime, this petition was just kind of hanging out in limbo. And now we're tying up loose ends, basically. So when we filed the amended petition, this was after discussion with the city and said, okay, we don't need it to be M1. We don't want it to be M1. The city clearly doesn't. But we do want some consistency with this piece of property instead of having it stuck with two different zoning labels. We're asking for entire parcel to be now rezoned to B2 to add flexibility for my client. And quite frankly, the only plans for it at the moment would be maybe expanding that business with the storage units and maybe adding a few buildings to the front, but that's not in play right now. He's still in the process of building on the other property that he just acquired. Again, the uniqueness of this property is that it was kind of split, not exactly in half, but roughly a third zone B2 and the rest zone R1D, and we're just trying to establish some consistency with this parcel. I would point out that there is precedence for this. The 2016, that property that my client bought to the east was similarly split zoned and went through before this board, the Plan Commission, and then ultimately before the City Council, and was zoned to B2, which is exactly what we're asking for tonight. My client sends his regrets. He would have been here. He was traveling. I see he wasn't able to join us. There was a possibility he was going to be able to, but clearly he's not on here. So I will answer the questions of the board as best that I can.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
Why don't we listen to Skylar's report and the attorney report, and then we'll take questions and comments.
Skylar, you're muted.
Skylar, you're muted. Yep.
Obviously, haven't been, you'd think I haven't done this before. Sorry. This is a report for P-100-20, rezoning of 4507 East Highway 12. This is for, the petitioner is Stephen Law Smith. The request is a rezoning of property from present B2 and R1D to all B2 general commercial zoning district. Staff analysis. The property in question is approximately 8 acres of land, currently zoned B2 and R1D. The land is also adjacent to the Shirley Hines Land Trust, which that large chunk directly to the west is a big chunk of Shirley Hines in there. That's just one of my analysis. According to Indiana Code 36-7-4-603, in considering a request for rezoning, the Plan Commission shall pay reasonable regard to 1, the comprehensive plan, 2, current conditions of the character of the current structures and uses in each district, 3, the most desirable use for which the land in each district is adapted, 4, the conservation of property values throughout the jurisdiction, and 5, reasonable development and growth. Staff makes the following findings. Number 1, that the petition concerns a request to rezone approximately 8 acres located at 4705 East Highway 12 and is currently dual zoned with B2 general commercial and R1D single family residential. 2, that the real estate consists of approximately 8 acres of land. 3, that the real estate is currently dual zoned as R1D single family residential district and B2 general commercial district. 4, that the petitioner requests that the real estate be rezoned to all B2 general commercial district. 5, that the requested change in zoning will be consistent with the Michigan City Comprehensive Plan, which calls for commercial development along the U.S. Highway 12 corridor. 6, that the requested change in zoning will be compatible with conditions and character of current structures and uses in the general vicinity and directly adjacent to the property in question. 7, that the requested change in zoning will provide the most reasonable uses for which the real estate is adapted and the proposed land use will not have an adverse effect on surrounding property. 8, that the requested change in zoning will not be injurious or detrimental to the surrounding property values and will further the conservation of property values throughout the area. 9, that the requested change in zoning will promote orderly and responsible community growth and development and will not adversely affect the community. 10, that the topography, soil condition, and other physical features of the real estate, as well as its location along an established commercial corridor, are suitable for the proposed use and zoning change, and that there are no covenants and restrictions running with the real estate which may be affected in an adverse manner. 11, that the requested zoning change is not spot zoning, which confers a special benefit to a relatively small tract of land, tract without commensurate benefit to the community. And 12, that the requested zoning change will not disrupt or destroy any neighborhood plan. And 13, that the requested zoning change will better promote and facilitate the development of the real estate than the current zoning, which does not define a boundary of where commercial use begins and residential use begins, thereby being very cumbersome for development of the individual parcel. And I might add that the reason I brought up Shirley Hines earlier, it's just one of my findings, analysis. We're always looking for buffers between uses, and having that Shirley Hines, there's a road, Fraser Road, that goes through there. There are a couple of houses back in there, but having that large chunk of Shirley Hines, which they keep things in perpetuity, I don't see that ever developing, and that provides a really good buffer between a B2 use and those residential uses along Fraser back there, having that large chunk of heavily wooded land right there. And I do believe there's some wetlands in that land as well. So it's virtually going to be impossible for Shirley Hines to, I don't think they would ever sell that or develop that, but it provides a good buffer. That's why I brought that into my analysis with this. Staff recommendation. Planning staff has reviewed the proposed request for the rezoning and recommends approval of the petition.
Thanks, Skylar. Mr. Hale?
My attorney report for petition number P-100-20 amended. Petitioner Stephen Lyle Smith and owner General Development Corporation of Kankakee, of which Mr. Smith is the owner and president. Request is to rezone property at 4507 East Highway 12. The rest of my report, which you have in front of you in written form, is a mere repetition of what I just stated as to the prior petition. They're both the same, requesting zoning and the standards that you're to follow and the process that this body is to follow are the same. You should approve or disapprove of this petition, and as part of your motion, indicate that you wish to pass it along to the Michigan City Common Council with a favorable or an unfavorable or no recommendation. Finally, I would repeat again that I had an opportunity to very thoroughly review the notice documentation supplied by the petitioner. I find that it's in order, that it meets our requirements, and that you're free to consider this matter.
Thanks, Mr. Hale. Any questions or comments from commission members?
I would if I could.
Yes.
Couple quick questions and a comment. I think this is probably Skylar. If I'm remembering this area, this was recently changed to narrow to one lane on Highway 12, and there's kind of a turn lane built in there now. In the future, if there was potentially another entrance added, could that present a problem? Is that something that would happen with subsequent processes down the line? Is it something we should think about here?
Mr. Gresham, great question. Yeah, they kind of just dropped the one lane on us one day. We go driving down the road and it's one lane.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of shocking to me as well. So we won't control the access there. We don't control the curb cuts. It's probably going to be controlled by the state, and I'd probably defer to Mr. Wright on that. He probably knows. I think he's had probably more worked with more state roads than I have in my career. But I would say that they'd probably be granted the curb cut or the entrance probably from the state at that point in time. I do believe there's already a curb cut there for the old business. But I guess we would have to rely on what they would present to the state to demand either a moving of the curb cut, another curb cut, removal. I guess that's, and I would probably defer to Mr. Wright on that to make sure that I'm not speaking out of turn. Jeff, you have any comments on that? Thoughts?
I don't, Skylar. It's all kind of hypothetical at this point without seeing a plan or a proposal in front of me. It's any curb cuts, any curb cuts onto 12 would go to the state. I think any of the plans
somewhere.
Any of the plans that would get submitted to us, we would go through and review. Even if the state issued a building or a driveway cut, I don't think that prohibits the plan commission or the building review people to scrutinize the overall plan and include the driveway approach. If we didn't like it. But sure. It's really hard to say without something concrete in front.
Michael, I might add, Mike, that down on 421, there's two parts to our reviews when land was developed. Like, say, let's take the Papas, for example. We know there's a right in, right out there. That was determined by the state rather than us. So they had to go seek that approval for what that entrance is. All that we approve are literally like everything up to that point is kind of within our purview. The state approved what the entrance was, and so they made the right in, right out. If that makes sense.
For tonight, all we're looking at is the rezoning issue, not any development plans. Is that correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Can I ask you a question? Mr. Zimmer?
Yes, Mr. Hale.
My understanding is that the one lane was at the roughly intersection with Moore Road, was it not? And so the area that becomes one lane is, let's say, between Michigan City and Moore Road, extending maybe no further than Dunlin Beach Road. Then there's 421, and then there is some commercial establishments, including an old motel, and then there's this property that is under consideration. Isn't that correct, Mr. Adamski?
I believe so, Mr. Hale.
I don't think it's one lane.
I might be misremembering the spot too. I could very well.
I don't mean to chime in, but that one lane doesn't start until Dunlin Beach Drive, like that road. That's when it turns into one lane.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Forget all that.
Add one more. Yeah, no, that was a good question. I might just add one more thing. That right now, currently, the front of this property facing 12 is already commercially zoned. It just it doesn't have a, like I said, it's very cumbersome with this one parcel that it doesn't have a defining, let's say, a line in the sand that says, okay, this is commercial, this is residential. So if somebody came to me with a commercial proposal, I don't know where I would end a commercial, and likewise, I don't know where I would end a residential, if you will. There's no. It's easy when there's parcels involved, but this is one parcel with dual zoning, so it's kind of a unique situation. I understand the dilemma, I guess, if you will. So.
And that actually kind of is the next part of my comment, just for the group we've got here. I don't know how far back everyone goes, but we've definitely had these kind of situations before where when we redid all these plans years ago, we kind of ended up with some goofy little mistakes, I guess, along the way. The one I remember better than any of them was the Lake Michigan Bolt location there by the old Elston High School, where the dividing line for zoning was literally in the middle of the building after we were done with it. So these are definitely things we've fixed in the past without a lot of consternation. So I don't see any issues with fixing this one either.
A comment that I have is and I don't know whether this is something to be concerned about or not, but now we're extending a business zone farther down what is essentially a residential road, going further down Mere Road and making a residential road now part of a business property. So I don't know, Skylar, or anybody there who think, what do you think about that? And because now there's going to be and there's going to be residences across the street now from this business zone property.
So a chunk of the rear of this property, and Brad, correct me if I'm wrong, if you look at the aerial, I believe there's a pond back there in that area, and I believe there's some wetland back there as well.
Yeah.
So there is probably some undevelopable space, if you will, with the wetland. I haven't seen a delineation. At a point of development, we'd look at delineation, things of that nature. I will say, though, without having a proposal in front of me right now, obviously, for development, but there are buffers that have to be maintained between any B2 and a residential. Even though it's in the county across the street, Mere Road is the divider. It's still a residentially zoned piece of property, and there is a buffer that has to be maintained for that. And then, like I said, the other side of that is that on the Fraser side, there is actually some single-family residential there too. The good buffer is really that Shirley Hines. You're never going to rebuild something like that. That's probably the best buffer you could probably have between uses, is literally a tree, old growth tree buffer. But the buffers that exist between B2 and I don't have them in front of me, but there is a buffering requirement. So they probably have to have like a equivalent of a wall, a berm, plantings, etc. Or they may just choose to not develop that piece of land and leave it like it is, and rather focus on the other side of on 12.
I can tell you for practical purposes, with the pond being located where it is, plus there is a corner of wetlands coming off the Shirley Hines property, there's no plans to develop that part of the parcel. And I don't know practically what it would take to even do so. By moving it to B2, even the use for indoor storage, it's still going to require us to go back before the BZA for special exception. And like Skylar said, to meet the screening and all sorts of standards there. So I can tell you as of right now, there are no plans to develop that leg of the L, the part along Muir Road. There may be temporary access for, moving vehicles in and out, but if anything, that alleviates some of the traffic concerns on 12.
So that was another part of my question is, if there was truck traffic coming out of that parcel onto Muir Road, is Muir Road that kind of a road for truck traffic?
Not for heavy truck traffic, I would say. We would have to, again, not knowing what exactly is coming off of that property and where. At that time, if they were telling us they're probably going to haul heavy trucks out that way, then I think Jeff and I would have to go back and evaluate what our recommendations would be for approval of a curb cut. Access to it. I mean, I think at that time there's regulatory things in our zoning code, or not things, ordinances in our zoning code that control that those access points and we define heavy haul truck traffic as well, heavy haul truck routes as well in the city. So we control those things already.
Wouldn't that be a consideration down the road for development of the property and not an issue for tonight for rezoning?
Correct. I mean, right now we're just trying to get the property cleaned up to allow them to put the potential plan together. A lot of these things are controlled by ordinances that we already have in place that are reviewed at a time of development or proposal for development. Okay. Or if they have to come back before us for special exception or whatever the next step is.
Okay, great, thanks. Any other questions or comments from commission members? Is there any public comment? Anybody in the public that wants to comment on this petition? Do you see any hands up, Skylar?
I'm looking right now. I do not. If anybody's out there, if you just want to chime in right now, the people I see are the people on the screen, so.
Okay. All right, so not hearing any public comment and no further questions or comments from the commission, then we're ready for a motion.
I would move that we approve this petition along with a favorable recommendation of the resolution for the Common Council.
I would second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Give me 1 second. Okay. Mr. Dabney?
Aye.
Ms. Esparter?
Aye.
Mr. Gallus?
Yes.
Mr. Granquist?
Yes.
Mr. Gresham?
Yes.
Mr. Klinger?
Yes.
Mr. Spurling left us. Mr. Wright?
Yeah.
And Mr. Zimmer?
Yes.
Motion approved.
So now, if I'm correct, Mr. Hale, we move into the certification part.
Yes, if you just have a motion to adopt the certification and the findings contained in it as presented to you in written form.
So moved.
And seconded.
Give me 1 second. Mr. Dabney,
Aye.
Ms. Esbar,
Aye.
Mr. Gallus,
Yes.
Mr. Granquist,
Yes.
Mr. Gresham,
Yes.
Mr. Klinder,
Yes.
Mr. Wright,
Excuse me, yes.
and Mr. Zimmer.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you all.
Good luck, Mr.
Thank
Dan.
you. We look forward to the next steps.
Have a good evening.
Yep, you too. Those are all of our petitions for this evening. Is there any new or old business to discuss?
Right now, no, but there may be some in the near future. So,
okay.
Bear with me.
On the agenda, as a matter of formality, do we want to add an item for approval of the agenda after the roll call? Would that be appropriate?
It's up to Mr. Hale. Question for Mr. Hale.
If I understand, Dan, what you're saying is in future, you would want us to approve the agenda after we take a roll.
Yes, a lot of meetings will approve the agenda in case there's any adjustments to the agenda, last minute deletions or additions to the agenda. I do that with some of the other public meetings.
Well, it's certainly appropriate. If you all would like to do that, we can do so.
Yes.
I think historically we've just kind of looked at them item by item, and if something needs tabling, we just pick that item out and table it till whenever is appropriate. Sort of like we did last month with the McDonald petition we just saw. But I mean, we can formalize the process too.
It's up to you. It's the pleasure of the commission. Whatever the commission would like me to do, we can put it on here. Thoughts? Anybody?
I think Dan's got a reasonable idea. It sort of tidies things up a little bit, and we understand how our meeting is going to go forward. We've been historically rather free form to a certain extent. So I don't have any objection at all to it. And if you guys can think it over, maybe we'll want to talk about it again next time and see how it would work.
My only question would be then, from a procedural standpoint, if we came into a meeting like we did last month with 3 petitions and we knew one of them wasn't going to be heard, what would there be process in place to be able to pick that one out to move it? If we're approving or disapproving the agenda, I mean, how does that work?
I think that would still be on the agenda. So when we got to that item,
I think what I believe what Dan's getting at is that, similar to another commission that I run, some things pop on that agenda immediately afterwards. We try not to do that with this because we're putting out the notice in advance to make sure. But I think it mainly just sets it that, okay, what we have in front of us, or what I have in front of us, or what's sent out is the official, the business of the business that we're going to handle tonight. Whether it's tabled or not, I believe that's just like normal to some extent. Once we get past. Does that make sense? Is that what you were thinking, Grant or Dan?
I think I was at a meeting recently where there was an application that got on the agenda, but there wasn't a timely submission of the information to be properly put on the agenda. So when we came to that, then if we review the agenda, then we can identify that and say that's not proper on the agenda, so we can delete an item. I've attended, for example, some county commission meetings where they would add something there. I don't know if there's any, obviously here we have some kind of public notice for most of our meetings. A lot of those things, Attorney Hale wouldn't apply like they would in some other meetings. I just
Let me add to that. It doesn't come up for us very often because we have the notice requirements that are rather extensive and so many days before our meeting. So it really doesn't come up in that regard. However, it does happen, and we've all seen it somewhat frequently, that there'll be an item on our agenda, a petition, and the petitioner has not met our notice requirements. And at that point, for one reason or another, we want to preserve what's happened already, and we would want the public to hear that that's being pushed over to another date. So for instance, Mr. McDonald's petition, I believe, commenced in July.
Yeah.
I know that Mr. Adamski's did. And they for one reason or another, Mr. McDonald indicated to you that they had this unknown problem with the sanitary line that ran through it, and they needed to negotiate with the sanitary district. Mr. Adamski had issues because he then came before the BZA and got a special exception next door, and he was waiting to see what happened there. So there are reasons where someone would want to ask for a matter to be either tabled, which has happened, or continue to the following month. And I would want the public to hear that happen and a date being given for it.
I have a question. Over the course of last year, did we ever add anything to an agenda that wasn't already published or put out for advertising?
Well, it may not apply so much to this commission if we have, our petitioners have to have all the notice requirements and things, so maybe a different kind of a meeting.
I mean, in theory, we could have stuff come like a planning department change or something, you know, a big plan come along, that kind of thing could be added just because I believe the notice requirements aren't quite the same, but in reality, usually we know if anything's going to be on, a possibility of it being on. We don't really get surprised in this group with something popping up.
No.
The Board of Works will adjust their agenda on the fly. That morning they'll add something to it, but I don't think they have the notification requirement.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, our notification. We have the state law that basically requires notification for just about
everything.
I mean, just about everything that we hear, unless it's something like changing our. I can't even think of an example. It's probably a poor example, like changing our petitions or something like that. If we're handling old business or something like that, but rezonings are required 30 days prior to even to start the noticing process, to work through that process, because each one requires no less than 10 days, no less than 8. You know, you have all that state law behind it that requires it be done meticulously. So, cases don't come to us, petitions don't come to us if they haven't. They either come to us and they're trying to follow the rules and they just haven't quite done it quite correctly, or they come to us complete. That's kind of how I'll present that. They get them filed and but they don't do them correctly.
My question would be, the next question would be, are there things that we take on as a commission that don't require public notice?
Well, Depends how.
If so, we could add those things. And so I think, I mean, if that's the case, then it would make sense that we would have approved the agenda that we added an item.
The only situation I can think of looking back over the last 10 years is for example, if Skylar knew, you know, maybe NICD was going to come in front of us with a part of their plan to talk about something happening in the future, that kind of thing. But, you know, like when we had Trail Creek plan happen and some of the comprehensive plan stuff, there's discussions around that, even if it's not a board action item, but that's about the only scenario I can think of where stuff comes in front of us for discussion that isn't approval voting kind of based stuff.
But depends.
So there's a potential for it then.
In that form.
Because we have item 6, new business and old business, but there's nothing listed much. So if we had itemization there, then we could remove or add things to new business, old business. Perhaps it's not part of the petition, kind of a notice item. But we don't.
Yeah, it's
anyway.
It's
Maybe it's too much of a formality. We don't need to do it. I'm just raising an idea.
It's up to you. I mean, yeah.
If
you want to think about it, and we can take it up for old business next time, you know, it's up to you guys.
Scott,
I'm sorry, Fred. Go ahead.
What kind of items would show up under new business, old business, where you just have the heading, but there's nothing much ever that shows something there?
Fred, you had a comment?
Well, I was just going to comment to the extent that it would obviously be one of the first items on the agenda, and it would indicate that set the standard for the meeting, and as a result, probably do no harm. I don't see any detriment to having that included. I don't know the instance where we would ever need it or require it either in my experience on the Planning Commission. But again, I want to say, you know, if it's a procedural thing that works out well in other areas, maybe it's something that we want to adopt. Excuse me.
Can we add non-notification items to our agenda on the fly? I mean, is that a permissible?
The answer is yes. Is it
Yeah, the answer is yes.
We can.
Yep, if it's not a petition or any of the petitions, yes.
Like I said, plan discussions have definitely over the last decade fallen under that new business, old business. You know, we did the cooperation with the county over the zoning ordinance when we had comprehensive plan discussions, Trail Creek plan discussions. We had the adult ordinance stuff, but lots of that fell under that new old business agenda area because they weren't actual petitions.
Yeah. It's yeah. I don't know if I have any more comments. It's up to the pleasure that whatever you guys. If it's just simply adding it on to our agenda, it's that easy.
I think we ought to bring it up at the next meeting. We get a chance to think about it, and we can vote on it then.
Okay, fair enough.
I would agree with that.
Makes sense.
Does that need a mo?
I'm out of space. I'm out of motion space.
Okay, so that was a new business item. Does anybody else have any new or old business?
No, sir.
Okay, I'll open it up for public comment then. Is there any public out there that would like to comment on anything related to the Plan Commission or petitions this evening or anything? Hearing none?
Yeah.
I will look for a motion to adjourn.
Skylar, do we have anything in the works for February?
Right now, no. But there are some exciting projects being talked about. I'll just say that, publicly. There's some exciting projects. There's a lot of land moving right now, hence why we're seeing some of these rezonings or potential. I think there's some pressure for housing as well, hence the rezoning. There's some things that are really happening. It's an exciting time in Michigan City.
Great to
It
hear.
really is.
Look forward to next
really
week.
is. There's a lot of things going on. So
Look forward to the update.
yes.
Thank you, Skylar. If
Thank
no
you,
one else
guys.
has anything, I will move to adjourn.
Second.
Let's go. Have a good month, everybody.
Everyone, see you next month.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Good night, guys.
Hey.
Thank you all.